Rehmann. Empower your purpose.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our One Question With series. We are so glad that you're joining us today. We today have Tom Shemanski with us, and Tom is our principal here at Rehmann, and he helps lead up our CFO fractional services, as well as does a lot with our manufacturing group here. And today what we're going to do is dive into one question with Tom, and it's in relation to an article that you had recently wrote. And you shared in this article that an organization not only needs a sound financial strategy, but they also need one that is underway, that is continually monitored, that can be adjusted if expectations aren't being met. And also something that we have been learning throughout the past few years is that we need to have a plan in place if a curveball is thrown, if disruption is happening, which is a very common, it seems like these days in the market or just within our world today. But also within this article, Tom, you mentioned that contracting with a third-party vendor for fractional CFO services and working with someone who actually understands how to help and execute this high-level strategy can take an organization to the next level. So today I want to dive into that with you a bit more and talk through how we can see how you can provide us with more insight on what it means to contract with a third-party vendor for fractional CFO services, and also what an organization specifically gains from this type of partnership. So the one question with today with Tom is going to be, what does it look like for an organization to have a fractional CFO, and why should this be top of mind consideration for leadership? Now, Tom, as we dig into this, I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit. And can you start us off with, as you're answering this question, start us off with what kinds of organizations actually benefit from a fractional CFO relationship?
Renee, thanks for the opportunity to come on and talk about this and the question. I think, it's a really broad range of companies that can really be a great fit for this. And I tend to focus clients on certain attributes, certain gaps. And so if your organization has these gaps, then this is where the great fit is. So I think as an organization, you have to, ask yourself, do we have the financial leadership? Do we have the accountability? Do we have the leadership we need on the financial side to really keep ownership and the management team, all rowing in the same direction, and have tools in place to really help us understand, are we meeting our goals? Are we on pace? Are we on track? And so, I think what I see a lot with especially mid to small size companies is there's just a big struggle to find and retain talented financial leaders, finding leaders that have the right skill set, the right management background to make an impact with their business.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, like you were saying, and, especially even having another voice come in. You mentioned accountability and helping with tools. A lot of times I think those voices can help bring in a perspective as well that can really help that organization focus and move forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I think some of the other attributes, we see a lot of times is how dynamic is the business? Are there changes? Is there succession issues? Is the CFO or controller retiring? Is there a change in ownership and they need different, financial support than the prior owner needed? So we see that really these organizations that are dynamic, that have some challenges in front of them, that's where the impact can be even greater. The return on investment for a fractional CFO can really be superior in these dynamic business environments.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you say that too, just from the fact that the defining what dynamic looks like can also probably be different than what some individuals or some owners believe is a dynamic situation, or something that they need to be considering a fractional CFO for. So I want to dig into this a bit more and look at the components of a solid financial strategy. and how a fractional CFO brings this to life. Can you talk to that a bit more?
Sure. I think all organizations, have to ask themselves, do we have the right financial leadership? Are they driving the areas the right areas in the business? And at a high level, a good fractional CFO is going to come in kind of with a blended approach, being able to provide that high level strategy. Where are we going as a business? How are we driving value? How are we, increasing profitability? But they're going to blend that with an execution piece of, are we on pace? Do we have the right tools to monitor to make sure our metrics are in line? So it's a combination of high-level strategy and the experience to be able to measure, monitor, and give feedback. I think those are the things that you'll see, because the planning process is critical. It's something that needs to add value and create engagement across your company. And that's what a good fractional CFO can do. They can leverage your experience, come in, drive engagement, get people involved with the strategic planning process, and really help bring that process to life. Because too many companies, it's just a small process, or it's not a very engaged process, and you see that in what you get. It's just not a very a dynamic plan. Growth might be stagnant, performance might be stagnant, and so really getting someone to come in and leverage the whole team to financial improvements is really what a fractional CFO can bring to the table.
Hearing that, my mind goes to not only just planning, but also helping activate the execution, working through that. So that I know that can also be a barrier within organizations, is you can have a plan in place, but also working on the processes to activate can potentially be a barrier. So that's great to hear. Can you give us? Go ahead.
I think a key term that we've used, or you've probably heard, is pivot, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to know when to pivot, how to pivot, and I think that's where an experienced CFO can bring that to the table to say, hey team, we need to pivot. We're 90 days or 6 months into this plan. We're not getting the results. There's various things, that have impacted it, but it's time to pivot. We got to change. We got to adapt. And I think that's where that experience in financial leadership really pays dividends.
I love hearing that word again, pivot. It definitely is still true today, although I know many people have said that they, that was an old term, but it still rings true a lot. So making sure that you have a plan in place and accountability to adjust and pivot is definitely valuable. Can you give us some examples of, maybe a client or two of some who have struggled with a lack of CFO support, and some of the benefits that they've gained from engaging in a relationship with a CFO outsourcing?
Yeah, sure. I can talk through a couple examples. I've worked with a number of clients that have various levels of sophistication on their financial team. It might just be an accounting manager. It might be a controller. It could be a first-time CFO. But I think what we tend to find is that they'll have a good transactional, process-oriented team maybe in place. They're really focused on the day-to-day, and they sort of struggle with, getting bigger projects done or providing that strategy support that the organization needs. So I think those are the areas that we tend to see opportunities to layer in a fractional CFO to give additional bandwidth and additional expertise to really work with what you have in your department to take it to the next level. So a couple of examples would be, had a client, about a $10 million client, and they were growing, had an aggressive growth plan, and felt like on the acquisition side, on the strategy side, they just didn't have enough bandwidth. They didn't have enough expertise. So, we put a fractional CFO arrangement in place, and it was a flat fee type arrangement. So it gave the client some certainty. It's like, hey, we know what the investment is per month. It's part of our overall department cost. But what it did is it allowed us to layer in a CFO consultant that could jump on their acquisition team, help them, think through some of the strategy issues, jump into financial modeling and look at those pro formas on what does a new company look like after acquisition, build in some of those acquisition costs. What does it do to cash flow? Look at their cash forecasting scenarios under a couple different approaches to an acquisition. So those were all things that really drove value at that organization because their current controller didn't have time, didn't have the bandwidth, didn't have the expertise. And when you're looking at a 3 to 5 year strategy, in 5 years they'd grow to the point to afford a full-time CFO, but they really couldn't afford it on the path to get there, if that makes sense. And so we really kind of came in and provided that specific CFO expertise they needed along their growth journey. And I think another client we had was one that had a struggling ERP system. And we put a fractional CFO that was good with processes, good ERP experience, and they just really needed someone to come alongside their team. They had a team that wasn't as experienced in running an ERP system effectively. And so, we just sort of brought someone in to help with that process, help review best practices on, ERP systems a lot of times boil down to complexity. How complex do you create the setup? What can you manage with your team? What's your key data that you really need? Because ERP systems have tons of bells and whistles, and so it's challenging sometimes for clients in that small to mid-sized space to understand what can they manage, what can they handle, how many bells and whistles do they need to put in place. And so that was another example where there was a clear gap, and they just needed some expertise to come in and to fill that space. So while that one was a bit more project oriented, the first one was more of that true layering in of a fractional CFO to be part of the team, to be in with regular meetings with management and to help in those key strategy areas related to acquisition and strategy and things like that nature. So those are a couple examples of some projects and some areas where the fractional CFO relationship really drove value and really fit well with the organizations.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a wide variety. I mean, with everything that you have mentioned, it really can go across multiple organizations, across verticals, and this type of support. So when an organization is considering a fractional CFO, what are the first steps for a team to consider? What should they be looking at? I know you've mentioned gaps. So can you break down what top things that they need to identify, and then follow up with our final question of what makes a great fractional CFO partner? What are those things that an organization needs to consider when they are trying to choose a partner that's right for them?
Yeah, I think there's two areas that are real important when you're considering this and how it fits within your organization. I mean, the first is finding the right skill set. At a minimum, your fractional CFO candidate should be pretty broad-based experience-wise across, financial reporting, strategic planning, financial modeling, cash management, key company negotiations and project management skills. That's kind of the toolbox that, the fractional CFO should be bringing to the table, to help. Because every organization will have a combination of these things that they'll need. And so it's important that as your business goes through change and as you find you have different projects, you're going to want that broad-based skill set to be a good fit for a longer-term relationship. And I think the other is just really cultural fit. Every organization has a different culture, has a different way of working together as a team to get things done. And so, you got to think of this as a key position, just like any other in the organization. So that cultural fit of that person into the organization, not only within the accounting department, but within the C-suite, within the management group, that's really important. So you look at things like communication styles, how hands-on they are, things that are going to be a good fit at your organization. You want to align that cultural fit because the toolbox doesn't really help you if you don't have the right cultural fit to roll that knowledge out across your organization to maximize the benefit that fractional CFO can have. So those are probably the two main areas that I encourage people to take a good hard look at to make sure the fit is right.
Awesome, Tom, and thank you so much. So, as we overview and look at the things that we've taken away today, really organizations should be looking at and trying to identify those gaps, and finding the right skill set from financial reporting. I know you mentioned negotiation and in those different areas and where they need support. And then the second would be that cultural fit. I love that you say that, because it's also, there's a trust being built. If we're planning out for the next 3 to 5 years for success, what does that look like, and making sure that you have the right person to help lead that forward, and partner with on that. So communication style, very, very key. Like you said, not only just within the accounting team, but across the board with the C-suite, with the people that are doing the day-to-day. So I really appreciate you calling those out as specific things that organizations need to consider when they are looking at fractional CFO services. It's a definitely a great takeaway for us today. We are here at the end, and you've answered a very broad question in a few different ways, so we appreciate that. Are there any final words, or is there any last thing that you would want to say to the audience that is here today who is just learning about this or even considering the fractional CFO?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just from a strategic standpoint. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. And so I find too many organizations get stuck in a rut. They do things the way they've always been doing it. They're only looking at things a certain way. So I do think there's a tremendous benefit of leveraging someone from the outside, an objective person who's going to come in and give you real feedback, right? If I have a client that I don't love the strategy path they're on, I'm going to share my concerns and why, and ask them to really, think about it and, sell me on it. Because if you're going to sell a customer on a new product line, can you sell me on it? Can you sell a customer on it? So those are all things that I think you can look at to say, am I getting these things now? Am I getting that objectivity from my organization? Am I getting the pushback? Am I being challenged? And is there someone, kind of giving that 30,000-foot view from a strategy, a performance, and a monitoring standpoint to help drive the direction of the organization going forward? What I found is in all of our CFO relationships, we drive value, and that's what keeps us engaged for the long term. So when you're out there looking in the market, that's something to keep in mind. Find someone that you feel is going to drive value and really help the organization and be part of your team.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And thank you so much. Once again, Tom Shemanski from our fractional CFO team, as well as heads up our manufacturing here at Rehmann. We are so thankful that you were able to join us today for our One Question With series and hearing from your expertise. And thanks to all of you who also joined us to listen in on our One Question With series. We really appreciate it and hope that you gain a lot of strategic insight that you can bring back to your team to consider. And join us next week for our next version and our next question in our One Question With series. Everyone have a wonderful day. And once again, thank you for joining us.